Surely we shall not turn back. Oh, sail on, sail on, sail on, almighty ship of state, sail on until the flag of the red, the black, and the green is perched upon the hills of their Africa. Because the time has come for the black man to forget his hero worship of other races and to create and emulate heroes of his own. We must canonize our own saints, create our own martyrs.
On October 14th, 1919, iconic black leader and controversial activist Marcus Garvey was shot by an associate. Perhaps this moment was inevitable. While we don't know much about the man who shot him, we do know Garvey had many enemies. Who was this man who could stir up such emotions in his rivals? To understand this, we go back 5 years to Kingston, Jamaica. That year, 1914, Garvey had recently arrived back to his birthplace from the UK. While in the UK, Garvey had already established himself as a prominent activist. But he wanted more, and had set his sights on the burgeoning civil rights movement in America. On September 8, 1914, Garvey sat and penned a letter to a man who for decades had been making headlines in the States, fighting for social equality and black empowerment. It made sense for Garvey to look up to Booker T. Washington. They both shared an interest in empowering the average black worker. For years, Booker T. Washington had been working to build the foundation for an independent black economy.
1/3 of the population of the South is of the Negro race. No enterprise seeking the material, civil, or moral welfare of this section can disregard this element of our population and reach the highest success.
Washington, who was born enslaved, took a pragmatic approach to civil rights. Both he and Garvey did not think that black people would ever be fully accepted into white society. Washington felt liberation would come by building individual wealth, teaching people to create their own businesses, a black economy. Garvey also felt strongly that black people would need to lift themselves up on their own. Garvey probably knew that there was little chance of a man with the stature of Booker T. Washington ever responding to his letter. But Garvey was passionate and eloquent and must have written an incredible letter to Washington, because on October 3rd, just shy of a month later, a letter arrived in Kingston from Tuskegee, Oklahoma. It was Booker T. Washington inviting Garvey to come to the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, Booker T's technical school. In Garvey's response, he expressed excitement, but also concern about journeying to a strange land. "I'm now asking you to do your best to assist me during my stay in America, as I shall be coming there as a stranger to those people. I need not acquaint you with the horrible conditions prevailing among our people in the West Indies." Washington responded with great kindness to Garvey's proposal, writing, "It will give us very great pleasure to make your stay as pleasant and as profitable as you can." But Garvey would not receive this promised assistance. On November 14, 1915, Booker T. Washington died of congestive heart failure at St. Luke's Hospital in New York City. This would have come as a blow to Garvey. It would have been a terrible year for him already. His father had been put in the poorhouse, and an unemployed Garvey could do nothing to help him. And now the man he looked up to was gone. Garvey had also been blacklisted as an anti-colonial trade unionist by British authorities in Jamaica. Undeterred, Garvey used the last of his money to purchase a ticket on a ship bound for America. On March 24, 1916, Marcus Garvey arrived in New York City, penniless and facing an uncertain future in a foreign country. On April 25th, just 1 month and 1 day after arriving in New York, Garvey entered the office of the Crisis magazine in Harlem, the NAACP's magazine, run by W.E.B. Du Bois. In theory, Garvey could not have picked a better moment. The offices of the NAACP, as well as Harlem itself, was abuzz with activity. American cities were experiencing an era of explosive growth in African American thought and culture, spurred on by the Great Migration. And the apex of this was Harlem. The very same time Garvey arrived, the NAACP was planning a major meeting of civil rights leaders at the Tropic in Amenia, New York. With his hand on the door of W.E.B. Du Bois's office, Garvey must have felt he had arrived at the perfect time and place. But how well did Garvey understand W.E.B. Du Bois? Du Bois was not Booker T. Washington. They had very different philosophies on civil rights. And Du Bois had had a long-running intellectual feud with Booker T. Washington.
I had begun to criticize Booker Washington, saying it wasn't enough to teach Negroes trades. The Negroes had to have some voice in their government. They had to have protection in the courts, and they had to have trained men to lead them.
Du Bois was committed to his idea of the talented tenth, the goal of which was to identify and educate the 10% most talented and intelligent people in the black community. While Du Bois was focused on fighting for acceptance and equality, Garvey had a very different view. He did not believe that white society would ever truly treat black people as equal. Garvey had a new idea: to return black people to Africa, where they could build a new Pan-African nation. It seems that the meeting that day in April did not go well. The historical record shows the two men did not have kind words for each other after the meeting. But Garvey was undeterred, and he began a meteoric rise, which must have surprised many in the civil rights community. Less than a month after meeting Du Bois, Garvey made his first speech in America at St. Mark's Church in New York City. And after that, there was no stopping him. 2 weeks later, he had raised funds for a 38 state speaking tour.
Brothers and sisters, Marcus, Garvey.
He was passionate and eloquent on stage, drawing in large crowds, and did not hold back in his criticism of New England-born Du Bois, who he now viewed as an elitist.
Our critics said that the race problem will be solved through higher education, through better education, and black and white will come together. That day will never happen until Africa is redeemed. Because if those who like W.E.B. Du Bois believe that the race problem will be solved in America through higher education, they will walk between now and eternity and never see the problem solved.
In 1963, civil rights leader A. Philip Randolph recalled the great appeal of Marcus Garvey and the Back to Africa movement, particularly for those who had recently returned home from fighting in World War I.
They had come out of the war, where they had fought and died, and come into the southern communities where they met a violent racial discrimination. Many soldiers were the victims of police brutality. Some were lynched, and therefore there was widespread frustration and discord and discontent among Negroes. Garvey came along with his doctrine of back to Africa, and he painted glowing pictures of what Negroes could do were they to migrate to Africa, how they could build great enterprises and things of that sort. And this caught the interest and the imagination of the Negroes, and many of them flocked into the Garvey movement.
People began calling him the Black Moses. With his influence rising, Garvey was achieving his dreams.
Garvey didn't care how the white man felt. Garvey had the feelings of the black man at heart. Garvey had the hopes and aspirations of the black man at heart, and the black masses detected this. They felt this. They were conscious of this. So they gave Garvey their support.
I'm able to gather you here because I understand you. Understand your neighbor, your wife, your children, and you will be able to live in harmony with each other and get the best out of life.
Garvey had extreme views on establishing a new racial hierarchy, and they would lead to his downfall. It all began in the spring of 1919 with the announcement of an ambitious plan. Garvey began selling shares in a shipping company called the Black Star Line, with the goal of bringing people back to Africa. People all across the country bought shares in the company, believing that these shares were as good as tickets and that they soon would be able to travel to Africa. But in 1919, an event occurred. which may have been a harbinger of what was to come. George Tyler, a part-time worker at Garvey's paper, entered the offices of the UNIA in Harlem. He found Garvey in his office, pulled a gun, and fired at Garvey, hitting him twice. Garvey survived, but his would-be assassin was killed while supposedly attempting to escape police custody, never revealing his reasons for attacking Garvey. Things only got worse when the one ship owned by the Black Starliner Cruise Company was declared unseaworthy. The company ultimately failed, and the people found their shares were worthless. This was a devastating loss to many, and it brought the attention of a new character to the Garvey story, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. With the FBI investigating his business dealings, Garvey made things much worse. He met with the KKK. Garvey saw common ground with the white supremacist movement, but the KKK had been guilty of cross burnings, lynchings, and other brutal acts across the South. Garvey wanted black people to leave America and return to Africa, and for different reasons, the KKK wanted the same thing. This meeting triggered a massive backlash. A formal anti-Garvey group formed within the civil rights movement called Garvey Must Go. They pushed for Garvey to be deported back to Jamaica. Things heated up with rumors swirling that Garvey sent assassins to target other civil rights leaders. In January 1922, Garvey was arrested and charged with mail fraud for having advertised the sale of stocks in a ship, the Orion, which the Black Star Line did not yet own. Garvey was eventually found guilty and imprisoned. Despite all that Garvey had done, he still had great support in the United States. 70,000 people signed a petition for his release, and eventually, the president himself, Calvin Coolidge, ordered Garvey's imprisonment commuted on the condition that he be deported immediately upon his release.
Those who sit around and say nothing good comes down our way. Some say what's the use to try? The world is awfully hard and dry.
Garvey would return to Jamaica, then travel to London, where he died in 1940, having never stepped foot in Africa. Marcus Garvey has left his mark on our world. He coined the phrase, "Black is beautiful." Malcolm X would later recall being inspired, seeing his father campaigning for Garvey. And Martin Luther King said he was the first man to give black Americans a sense of dignity and destiny.
Keep cool, throw your troubles far away.
As we look at more recent events, it is interesting to reflect on what Marcus Garvey would think of all of this if he were alive today.
Don't let a little care fill your life with grief and fears. Just be calm, be brave, be true. Keep your head and you'll get through now.